My name is Neha, and today's video I'm going to be addressing the topic of cultural acceptance with our special guest, Anushka.
Hi everyone, my name is Anushka. I am a psychologist. I work at a high school full-time. I also run my own private practice that aims at supporting Asian Australians and Pacific Islanders. I run a podcast as well, actually, around the migrant experience.
And Anushka, how do you think not having Eurocentric body pictures can affect a person of color's body image?
It can affect a person of color's self-image if you're living in a country that is predominantly white or, Caucasian, especially if that country has, doesn't have enough representation, I guess, on television, for example, or in the media in general. So if you're seeing just really white people that don't have the usual Southeast Asian features or not a very similar skin color, you start feeling like, oh, I'm not too sure how I feel about my own self. Like you don't have anything to sort of not compare yourself to, but almost role model after, because we do model after a lot of different, people and places. Now that is changing over time. For example, recently we've had, in the last couple of years especially, we've had so much representation on TV. Even the most newest Netflix shows, they have people of color on those shows. And the way that I'm seeing that this is impacting is even in terms of just the way that we dress. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because it's almost it's so cool to be on screen and to be seen as wow, this is possible. I am someone that looks something like me is on screen. Someone who's like me is on screen acting. I think it can have a really big impact on your mental health, especially if, you're not seeing it. But it's not just that, it's also about how others view you. And so yes, that can take, a toll eventually on your mental health.
Do you know how when Southeast Asian and ethnic parents move from their motherland to come to Australia, mm-hmm. and how they struggled a lot to give us a better life?
Yeah.
And because of that struggling, they want to make us go higher in life, and that gives us a lot of pressure to do better and to do the very best we can.
That does actually have an impact on mental health for young people. Look, ultimately, immigrant parents, they move to, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, wherever it is that they're moving for a better life. In the 2016 census, 49% of Australians were either born overseas or had a parent born overseas. So it just goes to show how massive the immigration population is here. When people are coming from overseas to here, they're learning to acculturate to the new culture, to the new language, the new values, to everything. It is really hard. It's hard for an immigrant parent to be dealing with all of that stuff. For most migrant parents, seeing their kids happy was to give them the things that they didn't really get the chance to have. Now that can, it can be detrimental.
And could you discuss the strain on relationships because of the communication gap between your family, since, they have different upbringings?
So in terms of Asian culture, it's a collectivistic culture. It means that everything revolves around your family, revolves around the community. When you're in Australia, it's an individualistic culture. So in an individualistic culture, what happens is everything revolves around, I guess, the individuals. Being collectivistic and being individualistic is polar opposite. And when you're a third culture kid growing up between both cultures, you're picking up the values from both places too. You might be going to school and you're seeing all your friends who are very individualistic. They get to do whatever they want, and, there's the rules seem to be a little bit more flexible for them, but you go home and your parents are like, well, you had fun yesterday, you can't have fun tomorrow. That's just the rules for this week. And that can be stressful. It can be really stressful for a young person. And that's what causes the conflict, because it's well, mom and dad, you don't get it. All my other friends are doing this. And your parents are well, no, we didn't grow up that way. What are you talking about? I think there's this idea that they want to carry on a lot of the culture that they grew up in, and they don't know any better than that because that's how they grew up.
And where can kids facing these issues go to talk about it?
It's a good idea to go and talk to a mental health therapist. So, any type of mental health practitioner. So whether that's a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. Headspace, obviously, great place to go. If you're struggling with this because it's a cultural issue though, I would highly recommend going to a culturally competent psych. So one of the reasons that I became a therapist was because when I was growing up, there wasn't any brown therapist. There wasn't anyone who understood what it felt like to be a third culture kid and the pressures that we go through and the differences between being bicultural and all of that. But there's other people out there too. So if you go onto Google and you search up Shapes and Sounds, they've got a directory of Asian therapists that you could go to. iHeart has a directory as well. So does SouthAsianTherapist.org. have a Google. If you've got like another person within the community that you can go to and speak to, that's always good too.
Well, thank you, Anishka, for joining me today. The conversation we just had about cultural acceptance has been quite helpful, and I'm sure that young people listening to this information would have found the information so useful too.